Look at the day's headlines. Firmly committed to their ironclad alliance and the final fully verified denuclearization of North Korea. That's what the US State Department says Presidents Moon and Trump reaffirmed during their summit in Seoul last weekend. Setting course for the second half, officials from South Korea's ruling party, the government and presidential office put their heads together to find the best economic policy direction for the remaining 6 months of 2019. Plus, Downing tools, tens of thousands of irregular food service workers in South Korea go on strike. It means some students might have to make do with bread and milk for lunch until a compromise over pay is reached. Our top story this morning, the US State Department has released a statement summarizing President Trump's visit to South Korea, through which he reaffirmed the unbreakable bond between the two countries. The statement, which was posted on Tuesday, said the leaders committed to further strengthening their bilateral relations, which are key for peace and security in the Indo-Pacific region. The leaders also took steps to deepen cooperation on security, economic, scientific, health and cultural issues in the region. This includes their mutual understanding on the need to keep working closely together on North Korea to fully implement UN Security Council resolutions to achieve the final fully verified denuclearization of the regime. Also mentioning Trump's surprise meeting with Kim Jong-un at the DMZ, the statement said they agreed to resume working-level negotiations. Now, fresh faces for a fresh start. A Washington Post report suggests that new blood in North Korea's negotiating team could prove the catalyst for a breakthrough in future denuclearization talks. It also expects the regime's vice foreign minister to lead the talks after the US confirmed earlier that the authority for the nuke talks has shifted to the North's foreign ministry from the United Front Department. Kim Hyo-sun with the details.
North Korea's former top nuclear negotiator Kim Yong-chol reportedly displayed an arrogant attitude towards U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his aides during previous denuclearization talks. Citing American officials, the Washington Post reported North Korea's new negotiating team could bring fresh progress to Pyongyang-Washington negotiations. It also noted the Trump administration hopes the chemistry between the two leaders will unlock a spirit of cooperation that has been absent from the working-level negotiations between the two countries. The article forecasts the North Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee could be U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun's counterpart. Such analysis comes as Pompeo told reporters Sunday that the regime's foreign ministry would be leading the denuclearization talks, confirming a shift from the United Front Department. Quoting experts, the article suggested Washington needs to have a shared understanding with Pyongyang on the detailed conditions of denuclearization and secure a better assessment of the regime's nuclear weapons inventory. It remains to be seen whether the two sides could seek a breakthrough during the resumed negotiations scheduled to take place in 2 to 3 weeks. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
North Korea has introduced a new commemorative coin that highlights the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. A member of the Seoul-based Korean Council for Reconciliation and Cooperation explained the coin issued this year by the regime's central bank is engraved with the words denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and protection of the world's peace and security. Lee Sang-hyun added there are 3 hands squeezing a nuclear missile-like object. The design is in stark contrast with last year's coin, which had a picture of a fist pressing down on the American flag and a rocket printed with USA. The South Korean government plans to boost investment to speed up the development of local semiconductor materials and parts. Now, this decision was made at a meeting on Wednesday between the ruling Democratic Party, the government and presidential office to discuss the economic policy direction for the second half of 2019. They said through annual investments of $850 million, they are seeking to raise the country's competitiveness in the sector. Now, this comes after Japan said it's tightening exports on key chip materials to South Korea. As for policies for the second half, they said the focus will be improving people's livelihoods, providing tax incentives to boost investment and measures to support the vulnerable. They also called for the swift passage of the $5.7 billion extra budget bill, saying they plan to use 70% of it within the first 2 months of implementation. Now, turning to the big trade story of the week, one that could have really serious repercussions for the export-driven South Korean economy, the Japanese government will impose restrictions on the shipment of chip supplies to South Korea starting Thursday, amid an ongoing row over a sensitive historical issue. While Japanese media reports that Tokyo is even considering expanding the list of restricted products, Seoul has started a legal review ahead of the possible filing of a complaint to the WTO. Lee Min-sun reports.
The South Korean government is undertaking a legal review ahead of its plan to lodge a complaint with the World Trade Organization over Tokyo's recent announcement to impose restrictions on exports of chip supplies to South Korea. A trade ministry official in Seoul said the review was started as Japan's export restriction is deemed to be in violation of WTO regulations. Japan's decision came after the South Korean Supreme Court ordered Japanese companies to compensate Korean victims for wartime forced labor during the Japanese colonial period. The restriction takes effect Thursday on 3 supplies: fluorinated polyamides, photoresist, and etching gas. These materials are needed to produce semiconductors and display screens for smartphones and TVs. In addition, Tokyo-based Kyodo News Agency reported Tuesday that Japan is considering adding more products to the export restriction list. They are likely be electronic components that can be used for military purposes. According to the report, Japanese authorities are in the process of removing South Korea from a wide list of countries that can buy electronic components from Japanese companies relatively easily. Japan's export restrictions could cause a trouble for Korean chip makers like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, as Japan controls 70 to 90% of the global production of the 3 materials. With only a day left until the new export restriction takes effect, South Korean firms are taking actions to minimize damage to their operations. The companies have dispatched representatives to Japanese suppliers to secure as many supplies as possible while identifying exactly which materials will be affected. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
An alliance of non-regular employees who work at elementary and secondary schools here in South Korea are scheduled to go on strike from this Wednesday, a move which is expected to paralyze school lunch services at nearly 4,000 schools nationwide. Now, this strike, scheduled to last for 3 days, will be joined by over 40,000 non-regular school workers, including cafeteria cooks, dietitians, and administrative assistants for teachers. They are calling for a basic pay increase of about 6%, as well as the elimination of pay discrimination. The Education Ministry says the majority of affected schools will provide substitute food, including bread and milk, to students, while some will slash school hours to deal with the walkouts. Now, European leaders have broken the deadlock and selected their top leaders, nominating Germany's defence chief as the new head of the European Commission. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Hong Yu, who is back from her vacation. So tell us more about these candidates nominated for what are essentially the most powerful positions in all of Europe.
Well, Mark, nominating German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen as European Commission chief was a choice no one was quite expecting because she was not one of the main front-runners. The nomination came after 3 days of negotiations, one of the longest in recent years. If von der Leyen wins the support of the majority of members in the European Parliament, she will become the first woman to head up the Commission. Von der Leyen has been a member of the German Chancellor Angela Merkel's conservative Christian Democrats since 2005. But she's not the only woman named to a top EU post for the first time, as the French director of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, has been tapped as president of the European Central Bank. Lagarde was also the first woman to head the International Monetary Fund. There are 2 other nominations for different senior posts, and they are Belgium's Liberal Prime Minister Charles Michel, nominated as the European Council President, and Spanish Foreign Minister Josep Borrell as the EU Foreign Policy Chief. European Council President Donald Tusk phrased the final outcome.
First and foremost, we have chosen 2 women and 2 men for the 4 key positions. A perfect gender balance. I am really happy about it. After all, Europe is a woman. I think it was worth waiting for such an outcome.
The struggle to reach an agreement on these nominations reflected the bloc's lack of unity due to political fragmentation on pressing crises like Brexit and mass migration. Tension is still bristling in Hong Kong after a chaotic week of angry protests, with demonstrators continuing to express their anger over a controversial extradition bill. The Chinese government has condemned the protests as serious illegal acts. This is Britain, which returned the territory to China in the late 1990s, warned there would be serious consequences if Beijing breaches their historic pact protecting freedom in Hong Kong. Yi Xingjie reports.
Beijing strongly backed Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam and her administration on Tuesday, saying the occupation and vandalizing of Hong Kong's legislature by pro-democracy protesters this week were serious illegal acts that endangered the social order. Speaking on Tuesday, China's foreign ministry expressed its strong support for the Hong Kong government and its police force.
The violent storming of the Legislative Council building in the Hong Kong Special Administration region and the indiscriminate damage to the Legislative Council's facilities is a serious illegal act that trampled on the rule of law and damaged public order. We strongly condemn this. The Chinese central government resolutely supports Hong Kong.
The spokesperson also reiterated Beijing's rejection of any foreign nation commenting on or intervening, adding such matters are strictly China's domestic affairs.
We express resolute opposition to the relevant countries who cruelly interfere in Hong Kong matters and China's internal affairs. We once again admonish the relevant countries to act cautiously, not to interfere in Hong Kong's internal matters in any way, not to support illegal and violent actors in any form, not to issue any incorrect signals, and not to make any incorrect moves.
Britain's Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt condemned the violence on both sides. However, he stressed China needs to stick to the agreements it made when it took back Hong Kong in 1997. Those include allowing Hong Kong residents freedoms not enjoyed in mainland China, including the freedom to protest.
The UK signed an internationally binding legal agreement in 1984 that enshrines the one country, two systems rule, enshrines the basic freedoms of the people of Hong Kong. And we stand foursquare behind that agreement, foursquare behind the people of Hong Kong, and there'll be serious consequences if that internationally binding legal agreement were not to be honoured.
Marking the 22nd anniversary of Hong Kong's handover from Britain to China, protesters stormed Hong Kong's Legislative Council building on Monday, vandalizing walls and hanging the old British colonial flag before they were dispersed by riot police. Yi Xingjie, Arirang News.
A deadly fire that broke out Monday on a Russian Navy research submarine has killed 14 crew members on board. Russia's defense ministry gave no details about the vessel involved on Tuesday or how many crew were on board at the time, but Russian media reported it was a nuclear-powered submarine designed for sensitive missions at great depths. After the blaze was extinguished, the vessel was moved to the main base of the Russian Northern Fleet for further investigation. Russian President Vladimir Putin, who called an emergency meeting with Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, expressed his condolences to the victims' families. July 3rd today marks International Plastic Bag Free Day, as the world looks to stop the use of plastic bags and opt for more eco-friendly options while shopping. With the input of a Spanish environmental group 11 years ago, the idea was also backed by a number of international environmental groups, including the US and France. With plastic waste a serious issue worldwide, many countries have begun enforcing strict measures on use of plastic bags, including here in South Korea, where major supermarkets and shopping malls were banned from giving single-use plastic bags in April.
South Korea's foreign exchange reserves rose by over 1 trillion won in June, which is around $856 million. The Bank of Korea says the reserves totaled around $470 billion last month. The weaker greenback raised the value of other foreign currency assets held by South Korea, leading to the increase in FX reserves. As of the end of May, South Korea had the 9th largest FX reserves in the world. China topped the list. The Seoul Metropolitan Government is turning subway stations on line number 2 into so-called smart stations. Seoul Metro plans to install a new ICT-based station management system at all 50 stations along the Green Line by next March. The new smart systems will increase safety, security, and operation efficiency along the line. Once the system is in place, a 3D map, IoT sensor, and advanced CCTV will allow integrated management of Line 2. Time now for our Life and Info segment, where we focus on information useful for your everyday life. For today, we're going to talk about the mini heat wave we are enduring in South Korea at the moment and how it can make you ill, sick, if you're overexposed to the heat. We have our health reporter, Che Shi-young, in the studio to tell us more. So, Shi-young, let's start by talking about the definition of a heat wave in South Korea. Different countries have their own threshold for what they consider to be a heat wave. What is that in South Korea?
Well, Mark, according to South Korea's weather agency, a heat wave refers to when the daily high is 33 degrees Celsius or above. When the heat wave is expected for 2 days in a row, the weather agency issues heat wave advisories. Now, but when the temperature reaches 35 degrees Celsius or above and remain there for the same period, then heat wave warnings are issued.
Okay, so we have the advisories, which are the lesser of the two, and then the warnings when it does get extremely hot. But you mentioned advisories, and I seem to remember reporting that we had in South Korea our heat wave advisory was actually issued in May, and that is one of the earliest ever recorded here in South Korea, right?
Well, that's right, Mark. Since 2008, South Korea's weather agency began to issue heat wave advisories, and most of them came into effect in June. But starting in 2014, the month of May also saw days when heat wave advisories were announced. Now, that trend continued until 2017. In 2018, the hottest year on record here in South Korea, the first heat wave advisories came into effect on June 1st. Now, for the first time in 11 years, heat wave advisories were issued in the southwestern city of Gwangju on May 15th. That's the earliest day of the year on record. Locals who recall last year's sizzling heat are wondering if we could see an even hotter summer this time around. However, some experts say the early heat wave doesn't necessarily mean it'll be hotter this year, nor are we going to see a more prolonged heat wave this year. Let's take a listen to some experts.
Full-scale summer heat starts after the monsoon front settles in, so any heat wave before the arrival of the front in May, for instance, can't really be an indicator of how hot it's going to be in the summer. Unlike last year when the rain front left early in July, the rain front will leave near the end of July this year, so the summer heat will start late and will not be as bad as the one we saw last year.
Okay, well that's good to know because last summer was awfully hot and even with the aircon running at full blast, it still was incredibly hot and sticky in most apartments. Now turning to heat-related illnesses, because you have to be extremely careful when the mercury is high. What kind of ailments can we suffer from due to prolonged exposure to intense heat?
Well, the heat waves affect both your physical and mental conditions. But first, let's see how it can harm your body physically. Let's take a look at the picture. Heat exhaustion is a direct result of the body overheating and is identifiable by the following symptoms. Staying hydrated is the key to lessen the severity. Be warned that if this illness goes unaddressed, heat stroke follows, a much more serious condition. Heat stroke requires emergency treatment.
Loss of consciousness and multiple organ failure occur during heat stroke and can lead to death. The most important thing to do is to drop the body's core temperature.
Okay, that's good to know how serious heat stroke is, because a lot of people underestimate how dangerous it can be if you have heat stroke. So don't stay out in the day. Don't stay out in the sun all day, especially in Korea, which is a hot country during the months of July and August. What about mental conditions? Give us some example of some heat-related illnesses that have more to do with our mental health.
Well, the experts that I talked to also said the heat waves also affect your mental conditions, most notably anxiety and depression. Now, let's again turn to our experts.
Heat wave causes sweating and dizziness that can bring on anxiety. The high temperatures raise stress levels and lower the capability to cope with it, inviting depression.
And health professionals say you can't really tell whether your anxiety or depression is the result of the hot weather. So please consult with a doctor if you're worried about your mental health, because these conditions can be mitigated. And again, staying hydrated and cool is key to prevent these illnesses.
Okay, wonderful to know, Xiong. We appreciate your reporting today ahead of what's likely to be a hot summer here in South Korea.
Yes.
Thank you for coming in today.
My pleasure.
Good morning. A heat wave advisory has been issued for Daegu and parts of Gyeongsang-do and Gangwon provinces. And heat will roast those areas with an expected high of 33 degrees Celsius this afternoon. So people heading outdoors will need to use the usual precautions against the hot and muggy conditions. And daily highs will be hovering above 30 degrees Celsius in most parts of the country. And along with blistering temperatures, UV rays and ozone levels will rise to unhealthy levels, while those in Gwangju will get the strongest UV rays this afternoon. So be sure to have your sun protection items ready and stay indoors if you can. Upper regions, including parts of Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon provinces, however, could see passing showers in the evening, while Jeju could see monsoon rain through mid-afternoon. No rain is in the forecast for Seoul for the time being. In fact, the heat will intensify in the capital over the rest of work week. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to leave the news and weather for now. Stay tuned to us, though, on Arirang TV. Plenty more coming up, including our next newscast at noon Korea time with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. So until then, goodbye.
What can the store be?